The slam of a locker echoed down the hallway, followed by the sharp crack of a cruel laugh. A hand shot out, shoving her books to the floor, pages scattering like torn feathers. She lifted her head slowly, eyes locking on her tormentor, not with fear, but with a calm that felt dangerous. In that breathless pause, everyone sensed it. The girl they thought would stay silent was about to change the story. The sound came first. A sharp, ripping noise that cut through the constant roar of Briarwood High's lunch hour. Forks halted midair, conversations died in half-formed words, and for one breathless instant, the entire cafeteria seemed to tilt toward a single point. Amara Holt stood in the middle of the room, her tray lying on the floor beside scattered apples and a dented milk carton. Her vibrant red blouse, the one she had ironed that morning with careful precision, now hung in two jagged halves where the deep V-neck had been split wider by force. Threads dangled against her skin like frayed nerves. Directly in front of her, Chase Whitaker still held a fistful of fabric in his hand. His varsity jacket, blazing yellow and black, looked almost theatrical beneath the bright overhead lights. His expression was not of surprise, but of possession, lips curved in a slow, confident grin that told everyone watching that this was exactly the scene he wanted. A few tables away, chairs scraped back. Students raised their phones as if choreographed, their screens blooming with red recording dots. The glow from those tiny rectangles lit up eager faces, each one hungry to catch humiliation in high definition. The air tasted of overcooked fries and something electric, the way it does just before a summer storm. Amara's pulse rattled in her ears, threatening to spill into her hands, her voice, her whole body. She pressed one palm against the silver dog tags hanging at her collarbone. They trembled, the cool metal tapping lightly against her skin, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Her grandfather's voice was steady in her memory, guiding her like a lighthouse beam through sudden fog. She lifted her eyes. Across the narrow space between them, Chase was already watching her. No laughter now, only the deep, pale blue of a gaze that pinned her in place. It was not an apology. It was a challenge. And in that locked stare, the real question hung in the air, as visible and dangerous as a drawn blade. What would she do next? The moment the fabric tore in the cafeteria became the kind of memory that replayed whether she wanted it or not. Yet for Amara Holt, it was not just that moment. It was the culmination of a slow, deliberate erosion that had begun 3 months earlier. In those first weeks at Briarwood High, the bullying did not come as a single blow. It was a series of sharp, scattered jabs, each small enough to be dismissed, each sharp enough to leave its mark. She could recall the sequence like fragments of a film. Brief, vivid flashes stitched together in her mind. The first frame. Her chemistry notes spilled across the polished hallway floor, the pages skidding under the feet of passing students. Laughter had rippled in the background, light and careless, like someone flipping coins into a fountain. She bent to gather them, but each time she reached for a page, a sneaker slid in and pushed it just out of reach. By the time she had collected the last sheet, the bell had already rung, and the room she walked into felt colder than the hallway. The second frame, her locker door stuck shut on a Wednesday morning. A dark glob of gum pressed against the latch, smearing against her fingertips when she tried to pry it free. The sour, sweet smell of artificial fruit clung to her hands long after she had scrubbed them in the girls' restroom. The third, her lunch tray knocked sideways by a casual shoulder bump from behind, sending a river of tomato soup across the table and into her lap. She had stood in the restroom afterward with paper towels pressed against her skirt, listening to the muffled sound of someone laughing outside the stall door. And through it all, the same faces appeared at the edges of each frame. Chase Whitaker, always watching, always smirking, sometimes just leaning in a doorway saying nothing at all. His friends too, broad-shouldered boys who moved like they owned the air between classes, their varsity jackets bright as warning signs. Amara had told herself it was better to endure it quietly. She had watched other students speak up, only to find the weight of the school's silence settling over them like a burial shroud. She told herself that her scholarship applications mattered more than any fight she could win in these hallways. But the strain was there, an invisible fault line under her composure. One afternoon, after a gym class that left her shirt damp with sweat, she lingered near the equipment rack, waiting for the changing room to empty. Coach Duncan was sorting basketballs into a wire cart. He was tall, his voice deep and steady during practice drills, The kind of man whose approval the team seemed to live for. "Coach," she began, her voice low, careful. He looked up. "What is it, Holt?" "I need to talk to you about something that has been happening. In the halls. In the cafeteria." She hesitated, then forced the words out. "Chase Whitaker has been—" The sound of a ball bouncing on the hardwood interrupted her. He caught it, tossed it into the cart, and gave her a look that was not unkind, but distant. "High school can be rough, Holt. You have to learn to let some things roll off your back." "This is not just teasing," she pressed. "It is. Focus on your game," he said, cutting her off. "On your grades. If you are strong in those areas, the rest will not matter as much." She felt her jaw tighten. It matters now. His hands stilled on the cart, but he did not meet her eyes. "I cannot get involved in personal disputes between students," he said finally. Then he turned, wheeling the cart toward the storage room. She stood in the empty gym after he left, the smell of varnished wood and dust pressing close around her. She knew then that she had been naive to think an adult in this building would step between her and the son of the most influential man in Ravenford. That evening, she sat on her bed with her textbooks open, but the words blurred on the page. Her phone buzzed once, twice, then again in quick succession. She reached for it, telling herself it might be Kayla. It was not. The video filled the screen in an instant. The cafeteria, her torn blouse, the gasps and murmurs rising like a tide. The camera shook as someone laughed just behind it, and in the corner of the frame, frozen mid-turn, was her own face, eyes wide, mouth set in a line so tight it might have been carved from stone. Beneath the video, a caption glowed in bold white letters against a deep black bar. "Guess even perfect girls have bad days." The name above the post made her breath catch. Sienna Ward. Sienna was not one of Chase's usual shadows. She was the captain of the cheerleading squad, her smile framed by a cascade of honey blonde hair. Her posts usually gathered hundreds of likes before the hour was over. And this one was climbing faster than anything Amara had seen. The numbers rose in real time: 120 likes, 180, 212. Each refresh brought more. Comments bloomed beneath it, some laughing, some pitying, some dissecting every detail of her posture, her clothes, her silence. It was not just the humiliation of the torn blouse anymore. It was the permanence of it, sealed into the internet's memory, impossible to erase. She set the phone down on her desk and pressed both palms against her eyes until she saw bursts of light in the dark. Her chest felt tight, as though the fault line inside her had deepened, running from her ribs to her throat. The question rose again, sharper now, impossible to ignore. Was silence still a shield, or had it become a trap? Outside her window, the last of the daylight thinned into dusk, the rooftops of Ravenford painted in shadow. Somewhere in the distance, the school's floodlights hummed to life over the football field, and the faint echo of cheers carried on the wind. Inside her room, the glow from her phone screen pulsed like a heartbeat, the video still looping, still climbing in numbers, as if daring her to look away. And in the pit of her stomach, something shifted. The living room smelled faintly of cedar polish and the faint citrus of the cleaning spray her mother used before leaving for her night shift. It was late Saturday afternoon, sunlight slanting through the blinds in clean, measured lines that divided the floor into strips of gold and shadow. Amara knelt on the rug beside her grandfather, Sergeant Holt, who was gripping the parallel bars they had set up months ago. His hands trembled, the muscles in his forearms jumping beneath thin skin, but his eyes, clear gray and watchful, followed every shift of his body with the alertness of a man who had learned to survive by noticing small details. "Shoulders back," he murmured. Not to himself, but to her. She moved closer, her hand steadying his elbow as he took another step forward. The wood beneath his shoes gave a faint creak. He paused halfway, the light catching in the silver of his hair. "You are breathing too shallow, Maya," he said, using the name he had called her since she was a child. "Breathe into your belly, slow and deep." Amara obeyed, feeling the tension in her shoulders loosen as air filled her lungs. "Again," he said, taking another careful step. The effort showed in the tight set of his jaw, but there was no complaint. "Every day, we make the body remember." She smiled faintly. "Remember what?" He turned his head just enough for their eyes to meet. "When the time comes, your body will act before your mind catches up. That is what keeps you alive. You are training with me, yes, but you are training yourself. His words landed heavier than usual. Maybe it was because the image of Chase in the cafeteria had been haunting her all day, that predatory smile lingering like the echo of a storm. Maybe it was because she had watched the video's view count climb past 1,000 before she finally switched off her phone. She thought of the dog tags against her skin, the cool weight of them during that moment when every eye in the cafeteria had been on her. When they finished the exercises, she helped him into his chair. He gripped her hand before she could pull away. Maya, you are walking a line now. You decide whether it is a border that keeps you safe or one you will cross. That evening, the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Her mother's voice drifted in through the phone speaker as they talked briefly, reminders about locking the doors, about eating something more than just toast for dinner. Amara answered with the usual reassurances, keeping the strain out of her voice. It was nearly sunset when the knock came. Vice Principal Dana Reynolds stood in the doorway, her expression composed but her eyes scanning the street before she stepped inside. She was dressed in a dark blazer, her hair pulled back into a low twist, the kind of neatness that gave no one an excuse to dismiss her. "May I sit?" she asked. Amara nodded and led her to the couch. "I am not here officially," Reynolds began, her voice low. "That means I need you to forget I was ever here, if anyone asks." Amara's pulse quickened. "Why?" "Because there are things happening in this school that will not stop until someone forces them into the light," Reynolds said. "I have been documenting incidents, bullying, harassment, targeting of students. Chase Whitaker's name comes up more than any other. The name hung between them like the scent of smoke after a fire. I need more than my own word," Reynolds continued. "I need students who are willing to gather what they see and hear. Discreetly. Phones, notes, anything. If we have enough, the school board will have no choice but to act." Amara felt her hands tighten in her lap. "If I do that, he will know. And if he knows—" "I understand," Reynolds said gently. "That is why it has to be your choice. I am asking, not ordering." The silence stretched. Amara thought of her grandfather's words, of the invisible line she had been walking. Her safe routine, keeping her head down, avoiding trouble, had not protected her. The cafeteria proved that. "Why me?" she asked finally. "Because you have already survived more than most," Reynolds said. "And because I think you understand the cost of staying quiet." Amara looked down at her hands, the faint mark where Chase's grip had caught her wrist still visible. "I will think about it," she said. Reynolds rose, her expression unreadable. "That is all I can ask for now. Be careful, Amara." She paused at the door. "And if you decide to help, do not tell anyone, not even your closest friends. Loose talk ruins good work." The sun had dipped below the rooftops by the time Amara closed the door. The house felt different, heavier, as though someone had drawn a new line on the map of her life. She was still standing there when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Kayla. "You need to know. Chase is telling people he has a plan for Monday morning. He called it your final lesson." The words seemed to pull the air out of the room. Monday? 2 days. Amara's hand went to the dog tags at her collarbone. The metal was cool, steady, and in that moment, she could not tell if it anchored her or weighed her down. Sleep did not come for Amara that night. She lay on her back in the dim light of her room, the ceiling above her shifting between shadow and the silver flicker of passing headlights. Each time she closed her eyes, the cafeteria scene rose again. The tearing sound, the gasps, the glow of phones lifted like weapons. And beneath it all, the message from Kayla replayed in her mind over and over, the words heavy as stone. Final lesson. Monday morning. By the time the first wash of pale blue crept through her blinds, her body felt as though it had been carved from tension. She sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her fingers to the cool metal of her grandfather's dog tags. Her heartbeat was a slow, deliberate drum. At the kitchen table, she traced her route to school on a folded map she had pulled from the drawer. 3 possible paths, each with choke points where Chase and his friends could wait. She marked the narrow side alley behind the gym, the fence break near the faculty parking lot, and the service entrance beside the cafeteria's loading dock. If she moved quickly, if she stayed among crowds, perhaps she could slip inside without crossing their path. She memorized each turn, each door. It was the kind of planning she had seen her grandfather do when talking through his patrols in the Marines. By the time she stepped out into the morning air, the sun had just begun to crest the rooftops. The chill in the air bit at her skin, but her pace was steady, her head high. The town was waking, distant engine noise, a barking dog, the rustle of leaves in the wind. She adjusted the strap of her backpack, feeling the faint shift of the dog tags beneath her blouse. At the corner before the school, she veered down the side alley. The pavement was cracked, weeds curling through the lines, but it was empty. The faculty lot came into view, the low chain-link fence ahead of her glinting faintly. She could hear the muffled thud of a basketball from the gym, the faint clang of a metal door. She turned the final corner, heart lifting with the thought that she might have made it unseen. And then she stopped. They were there. Chase Whitaker leaned against the brick wall beside the main gate, one foot braced casually, his yellow and black varsity jacket bright even in the cool morning light. Kyle and two others flanked him, their jackets identical, their posture loose but ready. The easy grin he wore in the cafeteria was gone. In its place was something harder, colder. Amara's stomach tightened. She glanced back toward the alley, calculating the distance, the time it would take to turn and run. But before she could move, Kyle shifted, blocking the path behind her. Chase pushed away from the wall and stepped forward, the sole of his shoe scraping softly against the pavement. His eyes found hers immediately, holding her gaze with an intensity that felt almost physical. From somewhere deep in his mind, another voice spoke, his father's, clipped and precise. Do not let them make you look weak. Not in front of the team, not in front of the town. The pressure had been building for weeks, since that Friday night game where he had missed the winning throw. His father had not yelled. The disappointment in his silence had been worse. And now, after the cafeteria video, the whispers in the hallway, the cheerleaders' sidelong glances, he could feel the control slipping. This morning was supposed to take it back. Chase flexed his hands, feeling the cool stretch of leather over his knuckles. The plan was simple. Corner her, remind her and everyone else where the balance of power lay. He told himself it was about respect, about holding the ground that was his. But somewhere, beneath the layers of pride and practiced swagger, there was a flicker of unease. Amara took a single step forward, her chin lifting slightly. The world seemed to slow, the morning light sharpening the edges of every shadow, the faint sound of a flag snapping on its pole above the gate. From her left, Kyle moved in. From her right, the others closed the gap. The space between her and the school doors narrowed into nothing but the bodies in front of her. In that breath, before anything happened, she could hear her own pulse. She thought of the map on her kitchen table, of the careful paths she had drawn, of her grandfather's voice saying, "When the time comes, your body will remember." The air was taut. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. And then, like the slow tightening of a lens, the scene narrowed. Chase's eyes locked on hers, his crew stepping into place, their shoulders forming a wall of color and shadow at the school's gate. The lines were drawn now, clear and unbreakable. The only question left was who would move first. The morning light was sharp, almost too sharp, as if every ray of sun had been honed into a blade. It caught the edges of the metal gate in front of Briarwood High, glinted off the silver buckle of Chase Whitaker's belt, and struck the lenses of the phones already being raised by students drifting toward the unfolding scene. Amara felt the cold in her fingertips, though the air was already warming with the approach of midday. It was not the kind of cold that came from the weather. It was the colder, quieter edge of fear, the kind that sits just beneath the skin and waits for a misstep. Her breath left her in a thin ribbon of vapor, the only sign she was still pulling air into her lungs. She made her fingers unclench, then let them hang still at her sides. Chase's eyes were fixed on her, pale blue and glinting like ice under glass. There was no smile this time, not the smirk he used in the cafeteria to rally a crowd. This was something more deliberate, more dangerous. He took a slow step closer, the sole of his shoe whispering against the concrete. "Look at you," he said, his voice cutting through the soft chatter of students in the background. "All dressed up for another day of proving you do not belong here." The words were measured, the tone almost conversational, but each syllable was sharpened until it scraped. Amara's spine straightened, her shoulders stayed square. She felt the familiar tension gather between them, a tightening of invisible lines in the air. "You think grades will save you? You think hard work will make you one of us?" His head tilted slightly, as if studying her. "It does not matter how perfect you act. Your skin will always tell the truth." The sentence hit harder than the cold morning air. It was not unexpected. She had known the ugliness beneath his confidence. but hearing it aloud in front of so many eyes stripped something bare inside her. A few of the students standing nearby shifted their weight, uneasy, but none of them spoke. The tap of a foot against the pavement, the click of a phone case snapping shut, small sounds in the thick silence. Her pulse climbed, a slow, deliberate climb that thudded in her ears. "Do not start it," her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind, steady and low. "Wait, let them show themselves." Chase's mouth curved, not in warmth, but in a knowing smirk that said he could feel her holding back. His gaze slid to the right, to Kyle Brennan, who stood broad and ready at his side. "Show her," Chase said. Kyle moved in 2 strides. The movement was swift and certain, his shoulder turning, his arm drawing back. The knuckles of his fist caught the light for a fraction of a second before they swung toward her face. In that instant, the world seemed to pull apart into fragments she could examine one by one. The rise of Kyle's chest as he inhaled, the faint creak of his Letterman jacket, the smell of his cologne layered over the scent of fresh asphalt. Her body shifted before her mind finished the command. Her feet slid back and to the side, her balance folding into the movement. The punch cut past her cheek with the hiss of air displaced, close enough for her to feel the heat of the motion. She did not raise her hands. Kyle's momentum carried him forward, past where she had been. His shoes scuffed the concrete as he caught himself, spinning back with frustration flickering over his features. Amara's breathing was steady, though she felt the coiled energy in her arms, the readiness to block, to strike, to end this. Her fingers twitched once, then stilled. She held her ground, every muscle locked in restraint. Behind Kyle, Chase chuckled low, the sound carrying more threat than amusement. "Quick feet," he murmured, "but that will not help you now." He stepped into her space. The proximity was sudden and deliberate, closing the air between them. She could smell the sharp, metallic tang of his cologne, the faint salt of sweat beneath it. His arm moved fast, and then his hand was gripping the front of her blouse just below the collarbone. The fabric pulled taut, the seam biting into her shoulder. She felt the pressure of his fingers through the thin cotton, the weight of his hold as he claimed the moment in front of their silent audience. Beneath the blouse, the chain of her grandfather's dog tag shifted. The metal brushed against her skin, cool and certain, as if reminding her that her center was still hers, untouched. The faint tap of the tags against her sternum rang in her awareness like a quiet bell. Chase's face hovered inches from hers. His voice dropped lower, but every word was clear enough for the nearest ring of students to hear. "You cannot hide behind your rules forever." The words were not loud, but they were heavy, and in them she could hear the certainty of someone who believed the ending was already his. She held his gaze. The edges of the world blurred until there was only the pale blue of his eyes and the sharp pull of fabric at her chest. Around them, the crowd had quieted to a hush, broken only by the faint electronic clicks of phones capturing every second. The dog tags swayed again, the chain catching the light in a brief flash. The movement was small, but it anchored her. Each swing whispered the same truth. Every choice from here would cut a path into the map of her life, and there would be no erasing it once it was made. She had not moved yet. She had not struck, but her stillness was not surrender. It was the final breath before something broke. The instant Chase's fingers clenched tighter on the fabric of her blouse, Amara felt the shift. It was subtle, a change in the weight of his body, the angle of his stance, small signs that years of quiet observation had taught her to read without thinking. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind, steady as a metronome. "When the time comes, your body will remember." And then it did. The chain of the dog tags pressed into her collarbone as she drew in one deep breath. Her right foot slid slightly back, planting against the ground, toes angled for stability. Her hips turned just enough to open the path for movement. There was no calculation, no conscious decision. It was pure muscle memory, born from months of guiding her grandfather through the same mechanics. Chase's weight shifted forward, pulling her half a step toward him. His breath was hot in the cold morning air. The grip on her blouse was meant to anchor her in place, to make her feel trapped. But it anchored him too. Her left hand shot to his wrist, not to tear it away, but to lock it in position. Her right knee rose in one swift, explosive motion, driving upward into the soft target just above his hip, below the ribs. It was the precise angle her grandfather had taught her. Core engaged, hip forward, strike compact, and controlled. The sound was not loud, but it was final, the dull, compressed thud of force meeting flesh. Chase's breath left him in a sharp grunt, his pale eyes widening, surprise shattering the mask of control he had worn since the moment she walked into his sight. The fingers clutching her blouse loosened, then slipped away entirely. His body folded forward, momentum carrying him down to one knee before both hands pressed to the ground for balance. Around them, the gasp of the watching students was a single, drawn-out note. The phones that had been recording almost lazily moments before were now held tighter, angles adjusting to capture his fall. From somewhere to her left, Amara caught a glimpse of her own image, reflected in a phone screen. Shoulders square, breath steady, hair shifting slightly in the breeze. She did not move to strike again. She stepped back instead, releasing his wrist, her hands open and visible. Her breathing was calm, almost too calm, as if her body had not yet told her mind what it had done. Kyle's face registered shock first, then a flash of anger, his weight shifting as though ready to close the gap. But he stopped himself, eyes darting to the ring of students whose cameras were trained on every move. The silent audience had become a witness stand. Chase stayed down longer than anyone expected. His breaths came in short, shallow pulls, his shoulders rising and falling too quickly. When he finally pushed himself upright, it was slow, deliberate, his face pale under the morning light. His eyes met hers, but there was no challenge now, only a flicker of something she could not name, something caught between humiliation and disbelief. She could feel the fault line inside her shifting again, widening. A part of her wanted to believe this was the end, that this single moment had closed the chapter. But another part knew better. This was not victory, it was exposure. She had stepped out of the safety of silence, and once you crossed that line, the ground never felt the same beneath your feet. Someone behind her whispered, "Did you see that?" Another voice answered, "I got it on video." The circle of students widened slightly, the low hum of murmured reactions building. The moment had already started to spread beyond the courtyard, carried by the glow of screens and the impulse to share. Then the first sound came, a sharp, distant wail rising above the murmur. The pitch climbed, clear and cutting through the morning air. It grew louder, closer, until she could make out the distinct alternating rise and fall. Aziren. Heads turned toward the street beyond the gate. The group parted just enough for the flash of red and blue to appear, lights slicing across faces and walls. The sound seemed to press against her chest, each pulse of the siren a reminder that something larger than this courtyard was now in motion. And layered over the siren came another sound, this one human, raw, and carrying a different kind of weight. A man's voice, deep and edged with fury. "What have you done to my son?" Amara did not need to see him to know who it was. The tone carried the same authority she had heard about in whispers, the same reach that had made students hesitate to even speak Chase's name. Mr. Whitaker had arrived. The siren wailed once more, then cut off, leaving the courtyard in a tense, echoing silence. All eyes shifted between the kneeling quarterback, the girl who had dropped him, and the man whose shadow was already stretching toward them. Whatever had just happened was over. What was coming next had only begun. The conference room on the second floor of Briarwood High was not meant for moments like this. Its polished oval table and softly humming air conditioner spoke of budget meetings and teacher evaluations, not of battles that could shape the future of the school. Yet this morning, every chair was filled, and the air was charged with the weight of something about to break. Amara sat near the far end, her hands folded in her lap. She could feel the faint press of her grandfather's dog tags beneath her blouse, the chain cool against her skin. To her left, Kayla's knee bounced in quiet agitation. Across the table, a cluster of parents and faculty members leaned forward in their chairs, waiting. Vice Principal Reynolds stood at the head of the table, a slim folder in her hands. She looked calm, but Amara had learned to read the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way she drew her breath before stepping into a fight she knew could cost her everything. "Thank you for coming," Reynolds began. Her voice was even, but its steadiness cut through the low murmur in the room. "I am here to present documentation of sustained harassment, intimidation, and violence against students at Briarwood High, primarily by Chase Whitaker and members of his circle." M. The name dropped into the air like a stone into still water. The ripples were immediate, shifted gazes, tightened jaws, a cough hastily smothered. Reynolds opened the folder, revealing a stack of photographs and printed screenshots. "I will let the evidence speak first." She tapped a small remote, and the screen at the end of the room flickered to life. The first image appeared, a grainy still from a hallway camera, showing Amara's books scattering across the floor. A figure's arm still extended from the shove. The next slide showed a close-up of a locker handle smeared with gum, the sticky mask catching the harsh light of a phone's flash. Then the montage began to move. Clips rolled in sequence. A slow-motion capture from a student's phone of a tray tipping forward, soup spilling into a girl's lap. A video from outside the library, where Chase's shadow loomed over a freshman boy as he fumbled with his backpack. Screenshots of cruel messages sent from anonymous accounts, their words stripped of context but heavy in intent. Each cut was quick, only a few seconds long, but together they created a rhythm, incident after incident, the weight of repetition sinking into the room like damp into cloth. Reynolds' voice threaded through the images. These are not isolated events. This is a pattern of behavior, reported by multiple students over the course of 3 years. The screen shifted to a new set of faces, students who had already graduated, their testimonies recorded in quiet bedrooms or parked cars. Their voices trembled in places but did not falter. "I left Briarwood because of what they did to me," one former cheerleader said, her eyes glistening under the glow of a desk lamp. "I was told to toughen up. I could not. They cornered me by the bus stop," said a boy with dark hair falling into his eyes. "I never told anyone because I knew nothing would happen. Now, maybe it will." The room was silent except for their voices. Then the images shifted again, to Friday's incident. Amara saw herself in the grainy footage, her blouse tearing, Chase's hand gripping the fabric. She watched the moment of stillness before she moved, the exact second when training became instinct, and then Chase folding to the ground. The clip froze with her standing over him, hands visible, the crowd caught in mid-gasp. Reynolds clicked the remote once more. The screen went dark. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a chair scraped softly against the floor. A man in a denim jacket stood from the row of parents. He was middle-aged, broad-shouldered, with the weathered hands of someone used to working outdoors. His gaze moved from Reynolds to Amara. "My daughter is not in this room," he said, his voice low but caring. "She is in a different school now. She asked me not to speak, but I am going to. She left Briarwood because she was afraid, not just of the boys who cornered her, but of the silence from the people who should have stopped it." He glanced toward the cluster of administrators at the side of the room. "What I just saw on that screen, it is the same thing she lived. And I will stand here and say I believe every word." Something in Amara's chest shifted at his words, a small but distinct loosening, as if a knot she had been carrying alone had finally begun to fray. Reynolds inclined her head. "Thank you, Mr. Latham." The man sat down, folding his hands on the table. Before Reynolds could continue, the door opened. The voice that entered was instantly recognizable. Deep, controlled, threaded with the authority of someone accustomed to having rooms pause for him. "Impressive presentation," said Mr. Whitaker. He stepped into view, dressed in a tailored suit, his expression carved into a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "But let us be clear. What I saw was a carefully edited piece of propaganda designed to damage my son's reputation and the reputation of this school." Reynolds straightened. "What you saw was documented truth, gathered from multiple sources." Whitaker's smile thinned. "What I saw was an attempt to weaponize gossip and half-stories. And I promise you I will not let this go unanswered." His gaze swept the room, lingering on Amara for a beat too long. "I will see to it that the public knows exactly what kind of people are running this school and the kind of students they are protecting. You think you can win this by showing a few videos?" His voice dropped into something colder. "I will destroy you both in the press before you have the chance." The silence that followed was heavy, brittle, ready to break. Amara felt the cool press of the dog tags against her skin again, their weight a steady reminder that storms did not end with the first lightning strike, they began there. And in the charged stillness, she understood. The real battle was only starting. The echo of Mr. Whitaker's threat still lingered in the air long after the conference room had emptied. Amara walked the hallway alone, her footsteps softened by the carpet runner, yet each one felt louder than the last. She carried the weight of the evidence Reynolds had revealed and the shadow of the retaliation Whitaker had promised. But somewhere else in the building, Sienna Ward sat in the back row of the cheer squad's practice space, the rhythmic thump of music from the main gym muffled through the wall. She stared at her phone, the screen aglow with messages stacked one on top of another. Stay quiet. She brought it on herself. We need to stick together. Some were from the cheer team, others from friends linked to Chase. But the tone was identical. Pressure wrapped in loyalty, threat disguised as unity. Her thumb hovered over the reply bar more than once, but each time she locked the phone instead. Through the narrow window in the door, she could see Chase across the gym floor, speaking with two of his closest friends. His gestures were sharper than usual, his face shadowed by a tension that had nothing to do with sports. She could still remember the sound of Amara's blouse tearing, the way Chase's hand had clutched the fabric, and the stillness in Amara's face before everything shifted. In Sienna's mind, the moment looped in two versions, one where she looked away and the scene blurred into gossip, and another where she stepped forward, said something, anything. The second version never happened, and it haunted her more than she cared to admit. A cheerleader's laugh snapped her back to the present. "You are not seriously thinking about getting involved in this, are you?" one of the older girls asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Because that would be a mistake." The pause before the last word was deliberate. Sienna's lips pressed together. She gave no answer. Across campus, Amara sat at a table in the library, a stack of homework in front of her she had no intention of finishing. Her phone buzzed against the wooden surface. The number was unknown. She hesitated before opening it, but the message was short enough to read in a single glance. "You will not make it to graduation if you keep this up." There was no signature, no hint of who had sent it. The thin, smiley face at the end made her skin crawl more than the words themselves. Her first instinct was to show it to Reynolds, but she could already imagine the vice principal's jaw tightening, the look that meant she was filing the threat away with all the others in a growing list that might never see justice. She tucked the phone back into her bag, pressing her palm flat against the dog tags beneath her blouse until the coolness steadied her breathing. That afternoon, Reynolds tried to add another piece to her growing wall of evidence. She met privately with Mr. Harlan, the chemistry teacher, who had been present during one of the hallway incidents captured on video. "All I need is your signature to confirm the date and what you saw," Reynolds said, holding out the form. Harlan's eyes darted toward the closed door before settling back on the paper. His fingers tapped once against the desk. "Dana, you know I have tenure coming up next year," he said quietly. "If I sign this, I might as well hand in my resignation now. I cannot take that risk." "It is not just about you," Reynolds pressed. "It is about every student who—" "I am sorry," he interrupted, sliding the paper back toward her without touching it. His voice dropped even lower. "You cannot protect me from the people who can make my life here impossible." The refusal was polite, but it landed like a slammed door. By evening, the air in town had shifted. Rumors moved faster than the wind over Ravenford's flat streets. Kayla found Amara in the small booth of the corner diner where they sometimes studied, her expression tight. She slid into the seat without ordering. "Someone is saying they have proof you attacked Chase without provocation," Kayla whispered. Amara frowned. "Proof? That is impossible." "They are talking about a video," Kayla continued. "A new one. I have not seen it yet. But the word is it shows you hitting him first." The weight of those words pressed into Amara's chest. A fake video could spread as fast as the real one. Faster, if it fit the narrative certain people wanted to believe. Kayla's voice was barely above a breath now. "If they release it, it will not matter what really happened. People will see what they want to see." Outside the diner window, the last light was draining from the sky, leaving the streets in the dim orange of the overhead lamps. Amara's reflection in the glass looked older somehow, the lines of fatigue carved deeper, by the knowledge that her fight had just opened a new front. And somewhere in the gym across town, Sienna Ward sat in her car, engine off, staring at her phone. A message waited in her drafts, unsent. "I know what really happened." Her thumb hovered over the send button, but the weight of every consequence she could imagine held it there, suspended between courage and silence. She did not press it, at least not yet. The announcement came at 8:30 on a gray Tuesday morning. The first bell had just rung when the principal's voice broke over the intercom, low and formal, stripped of any emotion. Effective immediately, Vice Principal Dana Reynolds will be placed on administrative leave, pending review by the district board. The words sank into the walls of Briarwood High, like moisture into old wood. In the hallway outside Amara's locker, the crowd did not react with gasps or protests. Instead, the silence deepened. Conversations dropped to murmurs. A few students exchanged quick glances, the kind that said, "We know what this means," but dared not voice it aloud. Amara stood still, one hand resting on the cool metal of her locker door. The corridor felt longer than usual, the exit farther away. She did not need to see Reynolds's office to imagine it. Papers boxed up, the desk bare, her coffee mug with the chipped handle left behind because she was not allowed to return for it. The school had just lost its only adult willing to stand between them and the Whitaker name. By midday, the second blow landed. The message came through Kayla's phone while they sat in the library. Kayla's eyes moved quickly over the screen, then lifted to meet Amara's. "It is Jordan," she said quietly. "He is pulling his statement." Jordan was the one who had caught the shove outside the library on video, the same footage that showed Chase laughing as Amara's book spilled to the ground. Without him, the timeline Reynolds had built would lose one of its strongest anchors. "Why?" Amara asked, though she already feared the answer. Kayla hesitated. His mother got a call from the Whitaker's lawyer. They did not threaten her directly, but she is scared. She told him to stay out of it. Amara leaned back in her chair, the ceiling's fluorescent lights blurring above her. She could feel the fault lines inside her shifting again, this time not with the sharp crack of action, but with the slow, steady pressure that wears stone down to dust. That afternoon, in the far corner of the student parking lot, Sienna Ward sat in her car with the windows cracked just enough to hear the voices outside. She had been about to drive away when she spotted Chase and two of his friends leaning against a black SUV, speaking in low tones. Something in their posture, shoulders angled inward, heads close, made her pause. "He will not show up to the hearing if he knows what is good for him," one of the boys said. Chase's reply was quieter but sharper, like the edge of a blade dragged over glass. "We make sure of that." Sienna's hands tightened around the steering wheel. The words were not loud, but they were clear. They were talking about another witness, someone still willing to speak. She could feel the push and pull inside herself again. She had spent weeks avoiding the choice, telling herself that staying quiet kept her safe. But every time she saw Amara's face in the hallway, she felt the weight of her own inaction pressing harder. She lowered her gaze as Chase glanced toward the lot. His eyes swept over the cars without pausing. Sienna started the engine only when they turned away, her heartbeat uneven as she pulled out. By the time the final bell rang, Amara's body felt heavy, as if each step toward the doors was through water. Kayla walked beside her in silence until they reached the sidewalk, then paused. "I have to meet my brother," Kayla said softly. "You will be okay?" Amara nodded. The word okay felt meaningless, but she let it stand. She watched her friend disappear into the flow of students before crossing the street alone. The small park across from the school was nearly empty, just a few scattered leaves brushing over the pavement in the wind. She sat on the far bench, away from the road, and pulled out her phone. The familiar blue banner of the hashtag greeted her. Number, Stand with Amara. For the past few days, it had been her one sign that people were still watching, still believing her side of the story. The counter had stayed in the top 5 trends for the district, sometimes higher. She refreshed the page. The number had dropped. She refreshed again. It was gone from the list entirely. For a moment, she simply stared at the blank space where it had been. The bench felt colder beneath her, the sky heavier overhead. It was not just a hashtag, it was the collective voice she had begun to trust, the proof that her fight had reached beyond the gates of Briarwood. Now it had gone quiet. She let the phone rest on her knee, her reflection faint in the black screen. The wind lifted the edge of her hair, and in the stillness, she wondered if she had been mistaken all along, if the truth could really hold against the weight of a name like Whitaker. The park around her was silent except for the low rustle of leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled the hour, each chime carrying the same question she could not push away. When every ally falls, will you still stand? The rain had begun some time after dusk, steady and cold, drumming against the narrow kitchen window. Amara sat at the table with her head bowed, her hands folded in front of her as though in prayer, though no words passed her lips. The air smelled faintly of peppermint tea, but the steam had long faded from the cup in front of her. Across from her, Grandfather Samuel moved with unhurried purpose, wiping down the counter as though it were a ritual that steadied his own thoughts. His posture was straight, his shoulders broad despite the weight of his years. He glanced at her only when he had finished and set the cloth aside. "You think the fight is over?" he said quietly, his voice a deep, steady current in the stillness. You think you have lost. Amara did not answer. Her gaze remained fixed on the dark surface of the table, where the faint reflection of the overhead light trembled with each drip from the eaves outside. Samuel pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. His hand, rough and warm, came to rest gently over hers. "Child," he said, and the word carried both gravity and affection. "Winning is not about applause or headlines. Winning is keeping the part of yourself that matters intact. They will try to make you bitter, to twist you until you are something you do not recognize. If you can walk away with your values unbroken, you have not been defeated." She swallowed hard, the truth of his words settling somewhere deep, though it did not erase the ache that had taken root in her chest. An hour later, Kayla arrived without knocking, her damp hoodie clinging to her shoulders. She moved with a kind of urgency that made Amara straighten in her chair. "I cannot watch them rewrite what happened anymore," Kayla said, brushing rainwater from her hair. "I still have the full video, unedited, uncut. Every second from the shove to when Reynolds stepped in. I am posting it tonight." Amara's first instinct was fear. "If you do that, they will come after you too." They are already trying," Kayla replied. "But if we keep holding back, we are letting them control the truth. I will post it from my account. They cannot accuse you of breaking any rule if you did not do it." Samuel listened without interruption, his gaze moving between the two girls. Then he nodded once. "If the truth is your weapon, use it wisely, but be ready for the cost." By 9 in the evening, the video was live. Kayla's caption was simple: "This is what happened. Share it if you believe students deserve safety and fairness." At first, the notifications trickled in slowly, dozens of likes, then hundreds, comments filling with both outrage and praise. By the time the clock in the hallway struck 10, the hashtag number "Stand with Amara" had returned, climbing rapidly up the trending list. This time, the numbers came with something new: resistance. Beneath every show of support, there were voices of doubt. Some claimed the video was staged. Others insisted Amara had provoked Chase and that the knee strike was an act of aggression. The comment threads became battlegrounds of their own, each refresh revealing longer arguments, sharper words. Amara read until her eyes ached. Her chest tightened not just at the cruelty of some strangers, but at the realization that the truth, even when shown in full, was not enough to unite everyone. She pushed the phone away and stared at the rain-streaked window. Victory did not feel like this. It was loud and quiet all at once, an uproar in the outside world and an ache in her own heart. The call came just before 11. Kayla answered on speaker, her voice cautious. "This is Maria Bennett from the Briarwood Chronicle," a woman's voice said. "We have been following your post tonight, and we are interested in covering the story. But I want you to understand, once we print this, it will not just be a school matter anymore. The Whitaker family has powerful connections. They may pursue legal action for defamation or try to discredit both of you." Oh. The room seemed to grow smaller around them. Amara felt the weight of her grandfather's gaze, Kayla's steady determination, and the echo of Bennett's warning. Truth was now moving beyond their control, gathering speed and weight like a river in flood. And somewhere ahead, they knew, it would hit something immovable. Whether it would shatter or break through was no longer theirs alone to decide. The winter sun lay low across the school courtyard, its light thinned and silvered by a gauze of cloud. Each breath hung visible in the cold, drifting away like the fragments of a thought. The air carried a brittle tension, the kind that seemed to make every voice quieter, every movement slower. Students clustered near the stone steps, some huddled in small knots of conversation, others pretending to scroll on their phones, but their eyes kept sliding toward the east gate. Something was about to happen, and everyone could feel it. Amara stood near the iron bench by the gate, her backpack upright against her calf. The metal of the bench was slick with frost, and the wind moving through the skeletal branches above whispered against her ears. Her mind replayed the events of the past days in looping fragments. Kayla's bold decision to release the full video, the explosion of hashtags, the backlash and praise intermingling in dizzying waves, the reporters' emails that arrived like drumbeats in the night. Her hands slipped into her coat pocket, curling around the small oval of metal she kept there. The dog tag was warm from her body heat, the engraved words from Grandfather Samuel worn smooth from years of touch. "Stand, even when standing shakes you." From the far end of the courtyard, a figure emerged. Chase. He was not striding this time. He was moving with measured intent, like a predator conserving its strength. His varsity jacket hung open despite the cold, his hands buried in his pockets. Even at a distance, she could see the faint shadows under his eyes, the subtle twitch at the corner of his mouth. His gaze locked on hers and did not waver, as though the entire world had narrowed to this small patch of frostbitten concrete between them. When he stopped a few feet away, the shadow of his frame fell across her boots. "You think this is over?" His voice was low, but the courtyard carried it clearly. The video, the hashtags, the reporters, they do not change what happens to people who push too far. Amara met his eyes and kept her chin level. Her heart thudded hard enough that she could feel it in her throat, but her words came out steady. "The truth is already moving, Chase. You cannot stop it now." His expression tightened. A ripple of something. Anger. Maybe doubt. Passing through it. He stepped closer until the sharp scent of his cologne and the faint musk of cold air on his jacket reached her. "I can make you wish you had stayed silent," he said. The syllables clipped, his tone colder than the wind. The silence between them pressed in. For a heartbeat, she thought he might act. That the violence she had always suspected was just beneath his skin might finally break through. But then a sound broke the standoff. Quick, firm footsteps crossing the courtyard. Sienna. She emerged from between the rows of lockers, the winter light flashing across her pale cheeks. Her grip on her phone was so tight her knuckles showed white, but her stride was unwavering. She stopped just short of Chase, her voice trembling but firm. "I am done pretending I do not know what you are capable of." She turned her phone outward so Chase could see the screen. Threaded across it were screenshots from a group chat, the language crude, the intent unmistakable. Plans to intimidate and corner a witness after school. Threats laced with mocking emojis, and Chase's own name appearing more than once among the instigators. "I sent these to the police this morning," Sienna said, her breath making small clouds in the cold. "They know everything." Something flickered in Chase's eyes. He looked from Sienna to Amara, his weight shifting slightly. The confident armor he usually wore seemed to crack, replaced by something sharper and more calculating. His gaze darted toward the knot of students near the steps, as though weighing how much of this confrontation was already being witnessed. A broad-shouldered boy from his crew, an underclassman with a jaw set in defiance, stepped forward. His voice was low and edged with hostility. "She does not get to walk away like nothing happened." His arm drew back slightly, the prelude to a shove. It happened in an instant. Chase's hand shot out, pressing hard against the boy's chest. The motion was not gentle. "No," he said, his tone cutting and final. "Not like this." The boy stared at him, startled, then stepped back. A hush fell over the courtyard. Even the few students who had been pretending to be elsewhere were now staring openly. Then, through the stillness, the sound of measured footsteps echoed, a different rhythm, heavier and more deliberate. Two uniformed officers stepped through the east gate, their boots striking the pavement in unison. "Chase Whitaker?" the lead officer called, his voice carrying easily over the courtyard's frozen silence. Chase turned his head slowly. "Yeah," he answered. The word quiet, but without hesitation. The officer withdrew a folded sheet of paper and handed it over. The sound of the crisp paper opening seemed unnaturally loud, a formal summons. The ink on it still smelled faintly fresh. Behind them, a small ripple of murmurs passed through the watching students. Some exchanged glances heavy with vindication. Others looked unsettled, as though unsure of what justice should feel like when it actually arrived. Chase glanced once at the paper, then back at Amara. His expression was stripped of the arrogance that had always clung to him, but it was not replaced by remorse. His eyes were hollow, as if something inside him had already shut its doors. The officers moved to either side of him, their presence cutting a clean line between him and the others. As they began leading him toward the gate, the wind shifted, tugging at his jacket and lifting a loose lock of hair across his forehead. For a moment, just a moment, Amara thought she saw conflict flicker in his eyes. Not regret, not guilt, but the heavy recognition that a decision had been made for him, and there was no road back. Amara's fingers closed around the dog tag in her pocket. The engraved words pressed into her skin, warm and certain, a tether in the cold. She stayed still, letting the moment settle into her memory like a photograph. Chase's figure moving away between the officers, the courtyard stretching behind him, the air taut with the residue of unspoken things. The murmurs around her blurred into a distant hum. She felt neither triumph nor relief, only the strange weight of a chapter closing. One story was ending. Another, uncertain and vast, was waiting just beyond the gate. The gym smelled faintly of varnished wood and chalk, its echoing space filled with the muted sounds of sneakers on polished floors. Winter light filtered through the high windows in pale beams, dust motes drifting lazily through the air. The mats lay in neat rows, their edges perfectly aligned, and a line of bright red emergency exit signs glowed above each door. Amara stood at the center, her hands folded loosely behind her back. The familiar hum of the space reminded her of the early days, when this gym had been nothing more than a room where she came to move, to escape, to survive. Now it was something else entirely. Vice Principal Reynolds moved along the wall, checking a clipboard. His glasses caught the light as he turned toward the group of students, 10 of them, boys and girls of different ages, each with an expression that mixed curiosity with apprehension. "Before we begin," he said, "remember the 3 priorities. 1. Create space to escape. 2. Call for help. 3. Report to someone who will take action. This is not about fighting to win. It is about ending the danger." His voice was steady, professional, but when his gaze met Amara's, there was a flicker of pride. She knew he remembered how this had all started. The bruises, the hallway, the silence that followed. She stepped forward. "You are not here to become fighters," she said, her tone calm but carrying to every corner of the gym. "You are here to remember that you deserve safety, that your voice is worth hearing, and that silence is not the same as peace, it is the absence of it." The students listened closely, some nodding. Amara demonstrated how to disengage from a wrist grab, her movements precise but controlled. She pressed the flat of her hand against the padded wall, indicating the bright red exit sign above. "Your first choice is always to get away. These signs are not decorations. They are lifelines. Know where they are, know how to reach them." She crossed to the far mat and mimed, pressing the panic button mounted there. A small red light blinked. "If you cannot leave, call for help. There is no shame in needing others to stand with you." Her eyes swept the group. "And if something happens, report it. Even if your voice shakes, even if they tell you to forget it. Reporting is not weakness, it is refusing to disappear." The class continued for another hour, the gym echoing with the soft thuds of practice falls and the sharp snaps of mats underfoot. As they wrapped up, Reynolds spoke to the students about resources, reminding them that safety was a shared responsibility. When the last student left, Amara stood alone in the center for a moment, feeling the quiet settle back into the space. She reached into her pocket, fingers curling around the dog tag. Its metal was warm from her palm, the engraved words worn smooth. She thought of her grandfather's voice. "Stand, even when standing shakes you." The afternoon of graduation arrived under a wide sky brushed with pale gold. The stadium was filled with rows of folding chairs, the stage draped in the school's deep blue banners. The air held the scent of fresh-cut grass and the faint sweetness of spring blossoms drifting from the edge of the field. Amara waited behind the stage curtain, her hands cool despite the warmth of the day. The murmur of the crowd swelled and fell like waves. She could see her mother in the front row, her hands clasped in her lap, and Kayla just behind her, a faint smile fixed on her face. Sienna sat 2 seats away, posture straight, eyes following the stage with careful focus. The principal's introduction faded, and Amara's name rang out clear against the open air. She walked to the podium, the boards beneath her feet creaking softly. For a moment she simply stood there, letting the sea of faces settle into focus. The parents, the teachers, the classmates, the strangers who had followed her story from afar. "When I first came here," she began, her voice steady though her chest felt tight, "I believed that silence was safety. I thought that if I stayed small enough, quiet enough, invisible enough, the danger would pass me by. I was wrong." Her gaze moved across the crowd, pausing at clusters of students she recognized from the self-defense class. "Silence is not safety, it is surrender. And surrender does not protect you, it erases you." She felt the wind lift a strand of hair across her cheek, the sunlight warm against her skin. We are told, in ways loud and quiet, to bear what is unbearable, to keep peace by keeping still. But peace without justice is not peace at all. It is an empty shell. And I am here to tell you that your voice matters more than your fear. The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before the applause came, rolling across the stadium like a tide. She stepped back, bowing her head slightly, then returned to her seat as the ceremony continued. Later, when the crowd began to disperse, Amara stood at the edge of the field. The dog tag rested in her hand, the sunlight flashing off its worn surface. She turned it over slowly, feeling the familiar grooves of the letters. In the distance, the stadium lights clicked off one by one, leaving the late afternoon in a wash of golden shadow. Her breathing was slow, steady, the same rhythm she had learned to hold on the worst days, when her heart had pounded like a drum and the walls had felt too close. "Excuse me," a voice said, small but clear. Amara turned. A girl of maybe 13 stood a few feet away, her backpack hanging from one shoulder, her hair pulled back in a neat braid. She looked nervous, but her chin was lifted. "I saw your speech," the girl said, her fingers tightening around the strap of her backpack. "And I saw the video. I do not want to feel afraid all the time. I heard you have a class." Amara studied her for a moment, the set of her shoulders, the flicker of determination behind the unease in her eyes. She nodded. "We start a new session next week. You should come." The girl's smile was small, but it was there, a spark just visible through the weight of uncertainty. "Okay," she said, almost to herself. "Okay." And Amara watched her walk away toward the parking lot, the braid swinging gently against her back. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from the far end of the field, and above it, the high, clear call of a bird circling against the sky. She closed her hand around the dog tag one last time, the metal pressing firm and real against her palm. Not an end. A continuation. The kind of victory her grandfather would have recognized, not measured in applause or headlines, but in the quiet shift of one life deciding it would not be erased. The breath she released was steady, deliberate, a rhythm that matched the slow beat of her heart. The circle was complete, but the path ahead was wide open, and she was ready to walk it. The stadium lights were long since dimmed, and the wind had settled into a soft evening hush. Amara stood at the edge of the field, the grass cool beneath her shoes, the weight of the dog tag resting in her palm. Around her, the echoes of the day lingered. The applause, the faces lit with pride, the nervous courage in the voice of that young girl who had asked to join her class. She thought of the road that had brought her here, of the moments when silence felt safer than speaking, when shrinking into the background seemed easier than being seen. She thought of the nights replaying cruel words in her mind, the mornings walking into hallways heavy with unspoken judgment. She had carried that weight for so long she had almost forgotten what it felt like to set it down. But standing here now, she understood something her grandfather had tried to teach her all along, that true victory is not about defeating an enemy, but about refusing to let the world take away your worth. It is about walking away with your values unbroken, your voice still your own. The field stretched wide before her, bathed in the last embers of daylight. Somewhere out there, others were still hiding in silence, convincing themselves it was safety. She wanted them to know the truth, that silence is not protection, it is surrender. That their voices, however shaky, could be the first step toward change. Her breath steadied. She lifted her eyes to the horizon and felt the quiet certainty settle in her chest. The journey was not over. The battles ahead might be smaller, quieter, less visible, but they would matter just as much. Every person who learned to stand for themselves became part of something larger, something that would outlast headlines, outlast her own story. And maybe, somewhere, someone listening to this right now needed to hear it. Maybe they needed to be reminded that courage is not the absence of fear, it is moving forward in spite of it. If her story has reached you, if it has stirred something in you, let it be the start of a conversation. Share what you have felt. Tell the world where you stand. And if you believe in stories that speak truth into the quiet, then stay with us. There are more voices to lift, more stories to tell, and perhaps one of them will be yours. She closed her hand around the dog tag, feeling its familiar weight. Then she turned from the empty field and walked toward the shadowed path ahead, her steps steady, her heart unafraid. Because she knew now, the legacy had already begun.